Awesome. So today we get to finish our discussion about inflammatory foods, and I get to get nerdy with you. My science teacher is going to come out today, and if some of it is like, what are you talking about, Sprague? Just hold on tight because it'll make sense at the end. And if any of the science can help you understand a little bit more or even be a little more motivated to eat clean, to make that decision to eat this versus that, then my work is done. So if anybody is like me, understanding is necessary. Otherwise, I'd be like, yeah, okay. Logically, I know that's a great idea, but I don't actually choose it in real life. So, in an effort to help us understand, gain clarity of why it's important to eat clean foods and what the difference is between complex and simple carbohydrates, specifically today, we're going to learn a little bit. Are you ready?
Hey,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
this is Tom. Hey, when you say clean, could you define what that means real quick, if
Yes.
you don't mind?
I am so glad you asked that.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll start and share my screen. I'll do a little bit of review about clean foods and what we covered last time. Now Tom, I'll get you that replay for lesson if you want to watch that. We talked about inflammation and my definition of clean foods, but we also planned it in here. So we're going to get started. All right. I'm going to share the presentation. There'll be lots of visuals to help us understand. And please do interrupt at any time when you have a question, because you may not be the only one with that question. Every good teacher says that, right? Okay, so here we are, part 2. This is how I run the show over here. Joy's at the bottom, but it's the foundation to all of the other things. So that's me. Just wanted you guys to know. Many of you are aware of me by now and you know how I operate. Moving forward, today we're going to talk about carbohydrates in particular, because I think that's where I get the most confusion around health and diet. And we're also going to talk about food energetics, specifically pH. And then we're going to go into some general guidelines that you get to take away with you and you get to experiment with and practice. So let's do a little bit of review. This picture, which we saw last week, you can see the glazed over face that Jenny has there staring at the cake. So when we're talking about sugar today, just know this is coming from a near and dear place to my heart and my own story and relationship with sugar, which is explained in detail in one of the other webinars. Okay. Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Hippocrates. There's also an Ayurvedic quote that we mentioned last time that talks about if food is right, medicine is not needed. And if food is wrong, medicine is not helpful. So along those lines, we are looking at food through the lens of wellness and thinking of it as medicine versus maybe what some of us, myself included, think of it as like a coping mechanism or something to do really quick that's annoying, or don't have time to cook, those types of things. Okay, clean eating. What is it and how do I do it? Often there's confusion, so let's see what this is talking about. So clean eating, in my world, and when I'm speaking with clients, it's anything that does not add to inflammation in the body. And clean eating to me is food that's like medicine that will actually reduce inflammation. And things that we talked about specifically last time include foods that don't cause sensitivities. For some of us, dairy, specifically A1 dairy, can be very inflammatory, myself included. It makes my nasal passages constrict, mucus, and then inflammation, which to me eventually led to bloating, gassiness, and even skin trouble, eczema, acne, brain fog, and things like that. So foods that cause those types of symptoms are inflammatory. And also other foods that can cause that are things like gluten. There's a class of proteins called lectins that can separate the cells in our digestive lining and allow things to leak through our gut into our bloodstream that shouldn't be there. And that causes inflammation too. So ways to eat clean include organic and non-genetically modified. Some of those genetically modified organisms disrupt our digestion, and the BTG, which is like a biopesticide, actually interrupts how we absorb food and digest food. So genetically modified food, while confusing, maybe we're not clear on what it is, just know that it disrupts our digestive system and can cause inflammation. Toxin-free food. So even if it's organic, it still may have heavy metals in it from the soil and other environmental toxins. So we get to be aware of where our food was produced. And that's kind of the end when we talk about the guidelines. I'm going to share with you some things to think about when I'm choosing my food, not only organic, but where was it grown? How far did it travel? Those types of things. And then also last week, we talked about the frequency of eating. So sometimes we can cause inflammation in our intestinal tract by eating too frequently. Every time we eat, there is energy input and it's work. The digestive system has to work. So if I'm eating 5 meals a day or snacking constantly or maybe drinking a soda regularly, the digestive system doesn't heal in between meals. It doesn't get a break. So we think about eating maybe with more time, more space in between. That doesn't make sense for somebody that's hypoglycemic. They need to eat more frequently to manage their blood sugar levels. But for the rest of us, we typically find better gut health when we have large blocks of time in between eating. Okay, now we're going to go forward and look at inflammation. So we talked about this last week. So those foods that are not clean could be causing inflammation in the body. And inflammation in general is a healing response. And it occurs whenever we stub your toe or put a staple in your finger like I did last week, or there's a microbial infection like you're sick, environmental toxins like those heavy metals that could be taken in innocently, sleeping habits, the food sensitivities, diets, and emotional stress and trauma. Those are things that cause inflammation. And then this is what inflammation can do to us. Some of that inflammation is affecting the tissue and actually causes scarring, but also chemically, it causes hormonal imbalance, blood sugar dysregulation, which we're going to talk about today with the carbohydrates, fatigue, all of these, lots of these things I experienced with my health crisis, if you will, skin rashes I experienced, depression. And another thing to think about, like the end product of inflammation over time, that chronic inflammation, which is like a slow fire in the background, is that we age quicker. It affects the length of our telomeres, which is another indicator for how fast we're aging. It shortens them, which ages us faster. So in the end, when I think about health and coaching, my main goal is to help people reduce the inflammation in their body. We do it this is focused on food, but also I get to focus a lot on healthy lifestyle, which includes stress management, sleep habits, movement, exercise. So we get to talk about food today, but just know inflammation can be affected and mitigated with many habits in our lifestyle, many healthy habits. Okay. Questions on inflammation. I will share the replay for anybody that just joined. Melissa, I'm so glad you made it. Okay. So I'm going to cover up these things. Looking at these two sides of this chart, if a food type caused what it did on the left or what it did on the right, would you want to eat this food? So thinking about that left column, blood disorders, that's hematologic, electrolytes, hypertension, our blood pressure, cardiac dilation, so heart trouble, cardiomyopathy, weakness in the heart, dyslipidemia, which is like cholesterol disorders, pancreatitis, malnutrition, obesity, all those things. Do we want any of those? Probably not. Then we look at the right side, hypertension, myocardial infarction, which is heart attack, dyslipidemia, that's the cholesterol imbalance, pancreatitis, obesity, hepatic dysfunction, which is liver disease, fetal insulin resistance, and then habituation, not addiction. So if you had to choose either of these columns, would we choose them? Probably not, right? The left side is actually alcohol, that's ethanol exposure, and the right side is fructose exposure, which is part of the sugar molecule, part of the table sugar molecule. So here it begins, you guys. These two are actually metabolized very similarly in the liver. The difference is sugar doesn't cause me to be lightheaded or drunk, if you will. So it's not a toxin that's regulated by the government, but it is a toxin. So too much sugar is a toxin. Too much ethanol is a toxin. In small doses, our body can metabolize and be just fine. But let's just be clear that that's what we're dealing with when we're thinking about sugar, which is a carbohydrate. And I'm going to explain the difference. So we don't need to like hate sugar or anything, but we get to be clear on what it is and what it does to us. Okay, so moving forward, a little bit of history. I had to get to the bottom of this because Jen Sprague had a sugar addiction and she still is very susceptible to it under stress. So I see it when it happens and I'm like, ooh, I really need that chocolate. Oftentimes it's not in my house. Okay, so humans evolved eating very little sugar, only the sugar that was available in fruits, which were a little bit rare in certain regions of the planet, and vegetables. And then this is what we have today, right? No added sugar. Yay, it's actually sugar. It's almost like everything that is produced and packaged has sugar in it these days. So how did that happen? There is a beautiful book out there called The Case Against Sugar. And there's also a documentary that is very valuable called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. And if you are a geek like me and you want to get into the details, then that's where some of these references come from. And I'll put them in the follow-up email. So when sugar was first, I'm going to get the word, not distilled. What's the word, you guys? Brain freeze right now. When sugar was first created, when we first got white sugar, the word will come to me later.
Refined.
Thank you. Refined sugar. When sugar was first refined, doctors actually thought it was like a medicine and that it was good for us. And so this is coming from that era. It was good for almost every part of the body, for the very young, the very old, the sick, for the healthy. It cured and prevented illnesses. It refreshed the weary, invigorated the weak. This is coming from the 1800s when sugar started to be refined. So now it is the third most important crop after cereal and grains. And when we get to the bottom of it, sugar is actually the culprit for the health crisis that we have today: obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Okay, moving forward. Gonna show us some graphs so we can kind of like see the drastic consequences. Let's see. Let me go back here. I see okay. At any rate, consuming 63 pounds of high fructose corn syrup per year and 156 pounds of sugar per year. So starting back in the early 1800s, we had very little sugar. It wasn't refined. It wasn't available. And now we get it wherever you stop along the highway. Okay. The sugar consumption and obesity. So just comparing, in the 80s, it was thought that fat was the culprit for obesity, and actually it's sugar. So when we think about these two charts, the bottom chart, the sugar consumption, and from 1700 to 1850, pretty consistent. There wasn't that much sugar. We weren't even mapping obesity because it wasn't a problem. Then when we start mapping obesity early 1900s and how it just follows that sugar consumption chart. So, and the chart above kind of shows how it's not necessarily fat that is causing obesity, because when we started to educate people that it was fat causing heart disease and obesity, the consumption of fat decreased, but obesity actually increased when we did that. So just thinking about how easy it is to gain weight from sugar, just a can of pop of day could result in 15 pounds of weight gain a year. So when we think about our adolescents today, it's easy for them to consume, myself included when I was young, 72 grams of sugar a day. But before the sugar was refined, we were eating 16 to 24 grams a day. Okay, all this is just valuable for us to get maybe some grace around what we eat, because what is present and what the culture is today is not how we evolved. And so we get to be kind to ourselves and be like, hey, we're kind of in this war zone out there and it's kind of hard to dodge the sugar. So let's just be clear. We weren't evolved to eat refined sugar, and this is the consequence. So now we just get to be aware and we get to make new choices. Okay. The diabetes, just sharing that information. Diabetes is also closely related to sugar consumption, and we'll understand why. Okay, The other interesting thing is that sugar, fructose, actually contributes to fat production in the body. So this is showing glucose and fructose, and it's not the clearest, but I really liked this diagram because glucose is the blood sugar. It's the fuel. It's 80% of the brain's fuel. It's what cells can use immediately to charge up their energy molecules. So glucose is what our body is engineered to use. And fructose, it didn't used to be that big of a problem because we didn't have a lot of it available to us, and it is natural. It's in fruit. So when we just eat glucose, that this is a line of how lipids are produced, and that's fat. So fat production in the body. When a glucose is there, over time, this is a dose of glucose. Over this time frame, fat not produced. But when fructose is given, fat production increased sharply. So that's why this is confusing, because, oh, sugar's bad for you, but really blood glucose is not bad for you if you're a healthy individual and that's your main fuel source. But fructose, which in high fructose corn syrup and lots of other sweeteners, is the culprit for fat and obesity. Okay, so I wanted to share too, because not all cholesterol is bad and not all fat is bad. We need fat. It is surrounding the cells. It's a part of hormones. It's part of the molecular structure of many hormones. And it helps the cell membrane actually be flexible. Cholesterol is necessary in the cell membrane to help it be flexible, not tear and be rigid. So cholesterol is not terrible. Fat's not terrible, but the type of cholesterol and fat is where we get confused. And a lot of doctors don't delineate between these types of fats. So they say if you have high LDL, then you are unhealthy. But there's two types of LDLs. One is actually normal and good, and the other one is the culprit for arteriosclerosis, the internal hardening of the arteries and things like that. So we're going to look at the picture. This third bullet, high triglycerides and low high density lipid is the indicator of heart disease, not low density lipids. So carbohydrates and fructose specifically are the culprits for increasing triglycerides and the wrong type of lipids. So here's a diagram. Large, buoyant, low density lipids are not terrible. Small, dense lipids are the ones that cause problems. But most of the cholesterol testing that you get, it's HDL and LDL. The LDL number groups these two together. So somebody that has a lot of large LDL, their doctor might be saying you have high cholesterol, but it might not be bad for them. So just keep that in mind. You can ask your doctor and request for a lipo profile where you can see the difference between buoyant and small dense, because this is what happens. The small dense particles are the ones that get close to the edges of the artery. So if this is my artery, they're the ones that are like down at the bottom, right? They're dense, so they're like sinking low, and they can get underneath the cells. So your artery is surrounded by a layer of cells, which those cells, it's a single cell layer that join together, and these particles basically get underneath and start to pile up and create these plaques. Those larger, buoyant, low density lipoproteins don't get underneath the cells. So this is what happens after a while. These little yellow particles represent those dangerous, low density lipoproteins that are under there. So that's something that I wanted to show you, that it's not fat that is bad for you. It's the way that fructose is metabolized. It creates these low density lipoproteins, which is a lipid and a protein together, that actually is causing the cardiovascular disease. Okay. So now we're going to move forward. We just went through all that. Okay, good. Oh, okay. So summary of the difference between glucose and fructose. Glucose is used by the body, usually immediately, whereas fructose, it doesn't get used by the body, it gets shuttled directly to the liver. 20% of the glucose goes to the liver and is stored as glycogen, which can be turned into glucose later when you're not eating a tiny fraction, like a half a calorie out of 100 calories, gets turned into that very low dense lipoprotein. But 100% of the fructose goes to the liver, and some is turned, like 30% is turned into that low density lipoprotein. Glucose stimulates insulin, but it also stimulates leptin. Leptin is a hormone that tells you that you're eating and you're starting to get satiated. But fructose does not stimulate insulin or leptin. So when I'm eating a lot of fructose sweet things like high fructose corn syrup, it's not actually telling my brain that I'm eating, and my brain is still craving more food. That's another problem with fructose. Glucose inhibits ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hormone I think of, like my grumbly belly, grumbly ghrelin. That's the hormone that tells you that you're hungry, that you need to keep eating. Fructose does not inhibit it. So when I'm eating really sweet things that have a lot of fructose in it, my brain thinks I need more calories still because it doesn't register fructose as sweet things. So now I'm craving, even though I just ate. And glucose does not promote metabolic syndrome. Those are the diabetic and the obesity syndromes, but fructose does promote those syndromes. So that's concluding the most difficult part, or the funnest part of this session today. And I would be happy to talk with you about this, or any questions you have, or family members, or any confusion. I'll do my best. I'm not an expert on this, but I was a science teacher. So this is what I get curious about. And this is what I like to understand so that I can move forward. But now we're going to move into some more, my picture moved, but that's okay. So products containing lots of sugar usually don't contain lots of fiber, fat, or protein. So when you're thinking about packaged foods that have sugar, usually don't contain lots of fiber, fat, and protein. And those are the molecules that will actually help slow down the release of the sugar into your bloodstream. Fiber, fat, and protein is how we evolved to eat. So that's why it's very important to help regulate our blood sugar by eating a balanced meal. And a lot of like packaged foods or processed foods have an abnormal amount of sugar. And so this is what we're experiencing. Insulin gets shot out in a high amount when I have a high sugar meal. And that insulin doesn't just bring your blood sugar back to normal, because the insulin is released in a higher dose than usual because you had more sugar than you may have needed. It makes the blood sugar actually really low because it's telling the cells to take in the sugars, but it tells them to take it in so fast and so quick that the blood sugar then drops really low. And that's when you feel woozy or tired or lightheaded. So it ends up having to crash after you eat that high sugar meal. And then you're going to want, when you have the crash, for me, for most people, then I want more food or I want more sugar. And so it creates this cycle. And this is what we experience. The blood sugar levels of somebody who's eating a lot of processed foods or foods with a lot of added sugar have this roller coaster experience with really highs and really low crashes. But we want to get the blood sugar more normalized so that it would naturally go up when I eat a meal, and then it would go down, but not too far down. So I'm still alert and can be active in my lifestyle. So what does your body crave when you're down there in the middle? You guys know you're probably craving more sugar or more carbs or something to make you feel comfortable. And even you might feel depressed when you're in a crash because it affects our mood as well. Okay, so moving forward, this is what we're going for, and we can imagine which foods are causing the roller coaster to be detrimental and which foods can help normalize your blood sugar. All right. Places insulin can take excess glucose, but fructose cannot. So this is where glucose and fructose differ as well. Just to wrap up the picture about glucose and fructose. Glucose is used by the brain. 80% of the fuel in the brain is glucose. Other 20% could be ketones. Tissue, blood cells take in the glucose. The liver takes in the glucose and stores it into chains called glycogen. And then when your blood sugar is low, it breaks up the glycogen into glucose and releases it back into your bloodstream. That's all normal. Muscles also take in and store glucose as glycogen. And then glucose, less than 1% of it is turned into actual fat. So glucose itself is not dangerous. Fructose does get created into glycogen, but it also creates fatty acids in the muscles, and 30% of it can be created into fat. So why people lose weight when they cut out carbs and why they lose fat is because the fructose is not being added to their diet, and they're going to start to burn the sugar that they stored as fat. Okay. So sucrose, thinking about where does the fructose come from? Sucrose is table sugar. That's the refined white sugar. And it's made of two monosaccharides, a glucose and a fructose. And together, when those two bond, it is one molecule of sucrose. So whenever you eat white sugar, you're adding sugar to the muffins or the cookies, then half of it is fructose and half of it is glucose. We can take some glucose. It's not the devil, right? You can have some fructose during your day. It's just when we have too much fructose, so we start to have problems. Okay, so now we get to have a tool. How do I know if the food that I'm eating, the carbohydrate that I'm eating, is going to cause that blood sugar roller coaster or not? There's a handy tool called the glycemic index. You can print things off of your computer easily. You can look it up. This is what you can use until you get really good at just knowing like which foods are high on the glycemic index and which are not. So here's what a graph might look like, something that's scientific. I have a book that is pretty thick that has almost all the fruits and vegetables, and it has their glycemic index. If we think about it, proteins and fats won't be here because they're not a carbohydrate and they don't cause the blood sugar spike. So this is going to be any food that has any kind of carbohydrate in it. So the higher the number, notice glucose is at 100 down here. That's going to cause your blood sugar to rise immediately. So anything that has a high number is going to cause the blood sugar spike more quickly. So things at the bottom, the baked potato, popcorn, watermelon, white bread, sugar, white rice, things at the top have the lower glycemic index, peanuts, bean sprouts, things like that. This is a short list. I have a couple other diagrams that you can see that might be more easy for you or you might prefer. So when I'm thinking about the dairy here, it's on here because of the lactose. There's sugar in dairy and proteins. Some of these beans have carbohydrates and proteins in them. So that's why it's here, but it's not the protein that we're measuring. It is the carbohydrate. So you can use graphs like this to help you. So when you eat watermelon, it's delicious. There's lycopene in it, which is a chemical that helps. It's an antioxidant, so it's not terrible. It's still natural food, but I might eat the watermelon after a meal that has healthy fats and proteins in it, so that watermelon piece doesn't just spike my blood sugar like a candy bar would. So we can start to experiment with how we eat foods and start to maybe eliminate some of those high index foods. Here's one more chart. I really liked this one. It's kind of like a shopping list. They label it good, bad. I don't think of it like that, but sometimes it's easy to think of it like that. So just thinking about in the bad foods, you see acorn squash at the top, which we would think it's a whole food. How could that be bad? It's not bad inherently, and there's definitely phytonutrients in it that are really healthy for you and vitamins and minerals. But eaten alone, it will spike your blood sugar. So we get to eat it with, I think my mom loves to cook like Italian sausage in there that's really clean, grass-fed sausage, spaghetti, which has maybe olive oil in it. So just think about the foods that you eat and maybe combining them in new ways and eliminating some of the foods. Okay. I think I would like to ask for questions. I just did a marathon of talking to get through some of that stuff, but I would love to hear what you guys have gleaned from that. What is coming up for you? You can say it out loud or you can write it in the chat. What's the biggest takeaway from the mini lesson on sugar and fructose?
Well, hey, Jen, you're definitely a science teacher. Or we're a science. You got a lot of great information there. So it's it's kind of overwhelming, obviously, all the stuff you talked about. You did a good job explaining it. So explain to me if you could. I like to try to eat a lot of fruit, which you think is good for you. Like I have a banana every morning, and I try to have grapes. I have carrots, not cooked carrots, but I have a lot of like stuff like that. And is that really? I think I'm doing myself good. I don't know. I'm definitely not overweight or anything, but are the sugars and fruits different because there's fiber? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
Yes, that's a great question, Tom. And this is one of those questions that for the individual, if I was working with somebody whose end goal was to lose weight, and like me, I went from eating like processed sugar, like chocolate and sweets all the time to like, oh, I need to cut out that. And then I ended up eating a lot of fruit. And so then I just kind of traded the processed sugar for fruit, which was still a step, right? For me, it was a step because you're right, there's fiber in it. And that quote, when nature gave us poison, it also gave us the antidote. And so with the fructose that's in fruits, those fruits come with fiber. And so the fiber helps slow down the release, and some of the fructose doesn't even get absorbed when the fiber is there to help push things along. And if you don't have weight loss as your goal and you're feeling energized during the day, then what you're doing is probably successful for you. If you wanted to take this information and experiment with it, like I used to eat a banana every morning on the way to work, and I would like be hungry, obviously, like naive me. I'm like, oh yeah, I did a banana. It's kind of big. And then I would be hungry in like 45 minutes. But then when I started eating almonds with my banana, that lasted a whole lot longer. And I could make it to like third hour or lunch. So you can experiment and still eat what you're eating, but maybe you just add some healthy fats in there or some protein with it. And you might find that you'll get even more energy out of the banana. But some people don't feel great and they like to eat fruit all by itself because there's some enzymes that are specific to fruit, and they might eat fruit as a snack. Like, I'm going to eat that. It's like 2 hours after my lunch. I've got another 2 or 3 hours for dinner. I'm going to have a banana. And that would be a nice light thing for your stomach to digest. It doesn't take a lot of effort. So fruit can be used in different ways, and inherently it's not bad. But if we do think about most of the regions in the world and our ancestors, they didn't have a lot of access to fruit. Most of the regions didn't have a lot of access to fruit. So it's not, maybe we weren't maybe engineered to eat a lot of fruit. So if it works for you, then you get to keep doing it, but you might experiment with what you eat with it. And if somebody is eating a lot of fruit and they are overweight and they want to lose weight, or if they are diabetic or have cardiovascular disease, then it would be time to cut down the fruit. There's options to do too. You could do Eat for Your Genetics, where you spit into a test tube and you send it in and you get back this report that it will give you one of like 20 different diets that has been matched up with your genetic profile to be possibly better for you. But the caveat is that we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg on genetics. So whatever we do know about genetics and how we can map it to diets, it's going to be an ongoing thing. We're going to be keep learning more. So even though I did that test and it gave me some feedback, it's not my Bible. And I used it, but I used it as like an eye opener because it said for me, I should eat like 45% of my calories should come from carbs. And from that 45%, 5% should come from fruit for me. And I was eating like 50% of my food was fruit, right? So I was like, oh, maybe I could try eating less fruit, right? Do I still eat, like, do I get it to where I eat like 2.5% fruit? Not usually, but there are totally times where I do. Like, I don't actually buy bananas and apples regularly, but what I have are like dried apricots, or I've got some prunes too, or figs, which are really good. So that's how I use that information. But it's a great question, Tom.
Okay, well, thanks.
Yeah. Yes, Shannon.
Okay, along with what Tom said, when I decided to cut back on fruit because of the high sugar level, for me, it looks like he's at a great weight, and so it probably doesn't, but he's probably good with it. But at any rate, if you have a good quality peanut butter and you just, spread that on every bite, that makes a big difference. And the other thing I started doing was using fruit as part of a dessert, so that after I had my meal with fat and protein, that was the fruit was part of my dessert, and it was buffered.
Absolutely.
And then I use, like, for the snack, instead of fruit, I would use like nuts, but you have to be really careful there because of the portion control, because there's high calories in nuts. So you have to watch that. Then my question to you is, I heard this, I don't know if it's true, that you could use vitamin B to buffer sugar. So if you know you're going to be eating some sugar, if you take vitamin B thereabouts, it kind of buffers it. Is that true or not?
Well, vitamin B is vital for metabolism, which is energy production, basically. So if you have the right B vitamins, if you have enough B vitamins, then you'll be able to maximally process the sugars. Whereas if you're short, if the B vitamin is a limiting factor, then you might have some extra glucose floating around and maybe it gets stored as fat. So if you make sure and have, full levels of vitamin Bs, and you'll be able to efficiently process the glucose at your natural rate. So it does make sense that B vitamins could support you in managing your blood sugar, and it's still like portion still matters, like you mentioned. Like even if I have enough B vitamins, there's many B vitamins as well. If I have enough of all my B vitamins, if I'm still eating too much sugar, it's going to affect me. And I'm going to have insulin spikes, which then can lead to insulin resistance, which is the beginning of diabetes. But we can get that insulin sensitivity back when we change our diet and eat less sugar. So that's a great question. And banana and peanut butter is one of my favorite treats. And I ate Debbie's peanut butter, homemade peanut butter with
yeah, there's nothing like homemade peanut butter. Nothing like that.
Yeah, she puts a little honey in it, which is a sweetener, which I am totally on board with. So awesome.
So one last question.
Yes.
Can you get vitamin B in plants, or is it only in, can you get vitamin B in plants?
Vitamin B is one of those where animal protein does provide, I think it's B12, the best source or most easily available source. So when somebody is a vegan, they can have trouble and they need to take B vitamin supplements.
Okay, that's what I want.
Yep.
Yes.
And so it is important to think about how you feel, because there are vegans out there who are very healthy and there are vegans out there who are not, and they are malnourished and struggling. Just like there are, omnivores out there who eat really healthy as well and are also malnourished for one reason or another. So good question. What else? One more question, or are you good?
You talked about the two different types of LDL, excuse me, cholesterol. How does that play into the ratio between HDL and LDL? Does the ratio of the one versus the other of the two LDLs difference?
So from my understanding, most of the way that the conventional doctors take your lipid profile is they measure the HDL, which are high density lipids, and the LDL, low density lipids. And the low density lipids actually groups those two together, the small and the large particle. So the large particle is actually not dangerous, and it acts like a high density lipoprotein. So it doesn't affect arteriosclerosis. It's not causing those plaques. So that's where it can affect your ratio. And we don't know, like if I had a client who got some results back from the doctor and it said that their cholesterol is really high, but they seem to have really healthy markers and other like milestones in their life that seem like they should be very healthy, then I might say, well, if you're worried about it, go and get the low density profile so you can see how much is high density and how much is low density. And there's a lot of research out there that there's people that are perfectly in the normal range for those small low density lipoproteins. Like they don't have a lot, but they still have high density lipoproteins. So that would be my advice. But if somebody has cholesterol that is bad, like they have a lot of low density lipoproteins, that's where I'm hoping that the doctors would say, hey, we get to look at your fructose intake. And I don't think a lot of doctors do that yet. But the doctor that did the beautiful Sugar, the Bitter Truth documentary, it's like a lecture where he explained all this. And I was like, oh, now I understand. So he's a doctor that's really helping children with diabetes. And so that's where his research comes from. And so thank you for asking the question. Did that help? Okay. All right. Let's get back to some more goodies so we can get to the guidelines. All right. There's a little bit more to wrap up with carbs, but it's pretty simple after this. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to share, I get this question a lot about types of carbohydrates. Simple versus complex. So they're both carbohydrates, and simple are sugars that are either monosaccharide or disaccharide, which I'll show you what that means. Complex are starches and fibers. So we're going to look at what that looks like on a food label so you can be clear when you're buying something, how much simple sugars, which are going to cause the roller coaster, the blood sugar spike, and that's going to be a high glycemic index food versus how much of the sugar in that food is complex fiber starches, which is low glycemic index. So that's where the glycemic index is valuable because it's kind of showing us how much complex carb is in it versus simple carb. And here's what it looks like. So if I was showing us, this is a shape, this is a representation of the shape of the molecule. There's atoms at each of these points. And a disaccharide, just like dilutes, there's two molecules. This is like what sucrose would look like. One of these would be glucose, and one of them would be fructose. And so this is table sugar. So when you eat table sugar, this gets digested very easily into two monosaccharides. And we know the fructose will go to the liver and be processed. The glucose will be absorbed right into the bloodstream. Some will go to the liver, but most of it gets absorbed in the bloodstream. A polysaccharide means many. Poly means many. So many sugars combined together. A starch has chains of these monosaccharides, and starches can have branches as well. And fiber is also a starch, but it just has a single chain and it doesn't get broken down by our enzymes very well. So the cell wall of plant cells is usually made of a type of fiber that we don't digest very well. And so with the type of balanced diet that most people think about, like, why do I need fiber? Fiber helps to I think of it as like pushing things through, keeping things moving through the body, but also it slows the absorption of sugars into your bloodstream. So when we look at the label, this item has 20 carbs in it. Out of the 33 grams of substance, 20 of them are carbs. So when I'm looking at this to begin with, I'm already like, oh, this is a high carb product, right? First of all, it's got a label on it, so it could be processed, which is another cue, like maybe I don't eat this, but also it's 2/3 carbohydrates and a third is broken down between fat and protein. So not much fat and protein in here. But when I look at the carbs, this is how we can see like how much simple sugars there are versus how much of those complex, slowly absorbed sugars. So if the total is 12, fiber is the type of carbohydrate that's not going to be digested and it doesn't contribute to your calories. The 12 grams of sugars are the part that is simple. And then what's left over, which they don't have a line for, is the starch. So I can take the total carb, subtract the sugars, there's 12, and I see the sugars and the fiber, and I see there's 6 grams of starch. So for this product, I can see that it's mostly sugar that's going to be turned into something that will affect my blood sugar pretty quickly. There is some starch and there is some fiber, so it's not the worst because you see a can of pop and all of it is sugar, right? All of it's going to be contributing to your blood sugar rise. So that's how you can look at a food label to know, like, does this have a lot of simple sugars in it? If it does have a lot of simple sugars, it doesn't mean you can't have it. It means you might want to pair it with some protein and fat with another item in your diet. Okay. And now we're moving into some energetics of food and we're thinking about pH level. When we think about our cells are mostly water, and the space between our cells is interstitial fluid, which is also liquid. And those two liquids have a pH that's optimal. It's actually different inside the cell versus outside the cell. But when we think about it all together, we want a slightly basic or alkaline pH to optimally function. And when we think about this, the reason why it's valuable is because you have enzymes, which are the worker molecules in your cells. Those are all proteins. But proteins will change their shape or denature if the pH is too high or too low. That's why the pH is important. Because if I'm too acidic or too alkaline, then my enzymes don't work efficiently, and then my metabolism slows, or I'm not healing very well, or I get a lot of inflammation in my body. So pH is very valuable when we think about the efficiency of a cell. And it just so happens that high sugar foods are attributing to acidic bodies. So we think about high sugar foods, or things like alcohol and soda. Those things are not necessarily health giving, and this is part of the reason why. So if you know, like I was very acidic from the sugar that I was eating and processed foods, then when I learned about this, what did I do? Obviously, I would go to the dark leafy greens, right? Spinach, broccoli, green tea is very alkalizing, and even the lemon or lime that you consume, or grapefruit, when you metabolize it in your stomach, it actually turns into a base. So if you test lemon or lime with a pH strip, it is acidic. But when you eat it, the byproduct from the processing of it is actually alkaline and very supportive for detoxification. So when you hear like, have a warm glass of lemon water in the morning, it's because it's helping to detoxify you and alkalize you from whatever metabolism that you did in the night. And lemon actually helps you hydrate a little bit quicker, it's found. So there's some information behind that. But this is super valuable just to think about, just more evidence. Why do I need to eat clean? Because an inflamed body is acidic. And I really appreciate these quotes. So every single person who has cancer has a pH that's too acidic. And some cultures are aware of this, and they treat cancer with oxygen therapy, which is not very expensive. And there's different ways that we can work with a sick body. But when we treat our bodies with some conventional medicine before we even address the diet, that's where I get confused, because we can turn an acidic diseased body into a healthier body that's functioning better. The immune system will function better if it's alkaline. So we get to start with changing your diet. And this one as well. Diseases happen in an acidic environment. So it's very important to keep your body alkaline, keeping a diet high in leafy greens, spring water, fresh air, raw almonds, lemons, grapefruit, and warm water with juice from a half a lemon helps lower acidity levels, from Valentina. So just keeping that in mind, super valuable thing for me to keep in mind. Like, oh, I just ate like dessert. Like today I had at the networking meeting, I had a sandwich with delicious, but I could only fit one of the pieces of bread in my mouth, which is good because I wouldn't have wanted to eat both. And it had I had 2 cookies at the end. So it's been quite a day for me. And I was like, I'm going in for the second cookie. And so I had lots of that was my day, and didn't feel guilty about it, really enjoyed it. But I had there was a lot of meat on it, and it was from a high quality restaurant. So I made an assumption that it was cleaner meat, that it could have been from like Arby's or something. It wasn't like that. So when I'm thinking about what I eat, now my night gets to be different, right? I had 2 cookies after lunch today. It wasn't 2 cookies on its own, which was good. There was protein and fat in my sandwich. But now tonight I've got broccoli and leafy greens on the menu and some eggs. Like that's how I like to eat my leafy greens, like make it with eggs. So at any rate, okay, good. We don't have to be perfect, but we do get to when I eat this, then maybe I can help myself out and become alkalized again by what I eat in my next meal, right? I'm going to have a very alkaline dinner. Okay, links between our mood. I just wanted to share this. This is something that comes in with my coaching. So not only am I working on people changing their food habits, but also their mood and their thoughts. So when we have an emotion, it creates a chemical signature in your body. There's chemical stimulation, there's hormones that are released, neurotransmitters that are linked to different emotions, and those can affect your pH as well. So this is fascinating. Not only are the foods affecting our pH, but so is our mood. So if I'm having a really stressful time, I could be contributing, and I am contributing to my inflammation. So when on the bottom of the inflammation list, we look at the things that can cause inflammation, stress and trauma can cause inflammation because those emotions have a chemical signature that affect our pH. So something else to think about. Alkaline emotions are like optimism, trust, hope, meaning, love, joy, peace, acceptance. And we think about the acidic emotions just like you imagine: bitter, anxiety, regret, jealousy, grief, shame, guilt. And I get to educate clients on this as much as they're willing to go into it, but this is very valuable as well. Okay. So now we get to talk about the guidelines. Are you ready? Okay. Clean eating guidelines. Wanted to share Michael Pollan is written several books, and they've been very helpful, I think, because he really simplifies some easy guidelines for when I am like, if I look at my week, these are the 3 guidelines he says: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And this is what Michael Pollan has like found for most people, not for everybody. So some people need to eat a lot of meat or only meat. Some people need to eat a lot of vegetables, and that's how they are optimally living. But most of us are in the bell curve, in which case these guidelines can apply. Eat food, and when he says food, he means not processed food, not food that has ingredients with numbers in it or chemicals that are not coming from the earth. So eat whole foods that are close to nature, not too much. That's where we moderate our portions, and mostly plants. Cooked from scratch is important as well. So I'm eating out a lot. I don't have a lot of control over the type of fat that they might use for cooking, and that could be detrimental. Okay. Lisa Baker is my health coaching friend, and she focuses mostly on food. That's her niche. She's like a brilliant chef. She has a cookbook, and she came up with this great acronym, or she shared this great acronym with me and her clients. So wherever it came from, I love it. So I always share it too. SOUL. So eat with soul, right? Seasonal, organic, local, ethical. This pertains to not only the cleanliness as far as chemistry goes for the food, organic, non-GMO, but it also the energy with which it was grown. So ethical food, if I'm thinking about food that was farmed with laborers that are treated fairly and with respect, and those laborers are feeling really valued and they're not overworked, and it's not child labor, things like that can affect the energetics of the food. And this is where we get maybe a little woo-woo, but you can think about it for yourself. If emotions can have a chemistry in my body, then thinking about the emotions that are dealt with food, and we can get into like how we're energetic beings. That's another conversation, but that's something I like to think about. Where did this food come from? Was it grown hydroponically in some lab, very sterile, or was it grown out underneath the natural sun with the ground and the minerals and the electromagnetivity of the ground, which is the earth is negatively charged, and acid or acidic bodies are positively charged. So if I want my food to be balancing me and be giving me my vital energy, it's great that it comes from the ground, which is negatively charged. So when you ground yourself out there, you're actually discharging some of that positive charge that your metabolism naturally creates. So yes, we want to think about where our food comes from. And if it's getting driven all over the country or flown all over the world, that can also affect the energy of your food, the frequency of it, and just something to consider. And then my caveat at the bottom: experiment with your body now. What worked for you in your 20s might not work for you now. What works for you now might not work for you a decade from now. What worked for you this week might not work for you next week. So we get to be in constant dialogue with our body. This is what I want us to take away. Your body is not going to lie to you. So when you eat something and it's responding to you, you have stomach ache, you got to go to the bathroom, or you're really tired afterwards, or you find your mood plummets. These are all pieces of information that can inform you as the next time you make a food choice. So think about that. Your body is this like beautiful laboratory. It's divine. It's totally truthful to you. So listen to the signals: energy, mood, and like physical symptoms. So for me, I think about clean protein. We talked about that in the first section, where it was grass-fed meat as much as possible, wild-caught fish as much as possible, those things that are not introduced with antibiotics and hormones. And then anti-inflammatory fat. Fats are so understated. Fat can be an antidote to inflammation in your body. Olive oil, omega-3s, the right ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is very anti-inflammatory. The wrong ratio is inflammatory. So the right fats are necessary for you, but they also can be like medicine. So don't shy away from fat, but just be aware of which fats you're eating. I think I have the diagram in here again, just to remind us. And phytonutrients. So having a wide variety of colors for polyphenols and for flavonoids is valuable for reducing inflammation. You don't have to know what those words mean. It's really just a nice reminder that we eat a variety. Who's got questions? I'm gonna stop this eventually and ask you for more questions. So I hope somebody comes up with some. I'm gonna share just a few diets here that you could try. Maybe you already do some of these diets and it's what you eat. Paleolithic diet is kind of where I landed for myself, but it might not be for you. So food that comes from the ground, there's more fiber in my diet than there used to be. And it is mostly, there's a balance between fats, proteins, and carbs, but the carbs are mostly starch and not simple sugars. And so that means it cuts out a lot of like not seeds, but grains. So I don't eat a lot of grains. And some grains have some proteins in them that can be disruptive to the belly, like gluten. It's a type of lectin. So Paleolithic diet is like foods that come from the ground. It's a mixture of healthy meats as well, but less grains. So my carbs come from vegetables, leafy and root, and also I like squashes and things like that as well. And here's that quote that I really appreciate that came up earlier. So when God gave us the poison, he gave us the antidote. And this Paleolithic diet for me was helping me reduce my sugar. Then we've got a couple other Mediterranean, ketogenic. Ketogenic can be very healing if somebody's got a super inflamed belly or gut that needs to heal, or if they're diabetic or pre-diabetic, this can help them increase their insulin sensitivity so they can stop having those roller coasters. And then after they do the ketogenic diet and their insulin sensitivity comes back to a normal range, then they can wean themselves off of this into maybe a Mediterranean or a Paleolithic diet. The Mediterranean emphasizes plant foods, healthy fats, and olive oil is their main source. They have a lot of fish as well. So I'm going to ask you about your diets here because you guys are wealth of knowledge too. Here's that healthy oil chart that I just wanted to just remind us because oil is like magic. We like olive oil, avocado, anything on the green side. We like to stay away from trans, and you've already probably been trained. Trans fats are bad or hydrogenated fats are bad. Hydrogenated fats have like, maybe I can mute that. Hydrogenated fats have chains, so chains of hydrogens that are straight, whereas unhydrogenated have chains with a kink in them. When the chains are straight, they tend to stack and cause like clumping. When the chains have a kink, they tend to be more fluid and flexible because there's a little bit more space in between, and it affects how it's metabolized. So hydrogenated, no bueno. And we get to stay away, if you can, wean yourself off of the man-made buttery type spreads because they usually have canola oil or other types of hydrogenated fats. Okay. And this is another reminder. We talked about this a little bit at the end of the last one. I'd like to wrap it up with this slide. Healthy gut in general. The healthy gut is a reflection of what I eat, how I feel, and how I move. And the healthy gut is really the foundation of our health in general. A leaky gut, an inflamed gut that's not digesting or absorbing nutrients very well, it's going to affect my mood and it's going to affect my energy level. So that's something that we get to think about. And if you questions about what probiotics are and prebiotics, then we can talk about that another time, but that's where we're ending this picture extravaganza. So now I'd love to wrap it up with what your takeaway is or what works for you. I'd like to hear from everybody, if you're willing to share what it is that you might be willing to shift in your diet moving forward, or just what was the most like aha moment for you. Go, who's first?
I think going back to 2013, I switched to a paleo diet, and I did really well with that, not only health-wise, but weight-wise and everything else.
Awesome.
But the last year, I've had this really scary relationship with carbohydrates. So going through this was kind of my wake-up call is, you know, you really got to get back on track and get everything back in order again.
I love that.
My gut is just screaming. It's like, stop it. Stop the madness.
Beautiful. John, this is for you, man. Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here. That was me, my gut, and I was in my 20s, bloated. I had stomach aches from seemingly healthy food. And then that manifested into brain fog and like eczema and all sorts of like skin
Right.
rashy type things. So it's a game changer. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for sharing. What else? I see Debbie's off mute. You've always been off mute. What was your favorite aha or thing you're curious to try?
How do you test your pH?
There are pH strips. That's a good question. You can test saliva, and also some protocols might have you test your urine. So you can test your pH like that. I can help you with that if you like. You can get strips at like Rite Aid and things like that, pH strips.
Okay.
And when people are doing a ketogenic diet, they can use those strips as a tool as well, because in a ketogenic diet, they want to get into ketosis, which is actually acidic, for a healing experience. But that to me is why it's not meant to be a diet forever and ever and ever. It can be very healing for certain reasons, which are another slideshow, but good question. What else? What did we learn? What's your favorite thing? What's your question? Maybe you're angry like I was when I learned all of this. And I was like, oh,
Hey, Jen.
how am I going to do that?
Hey, we've noticed that, like, most salad dressings are all seed oils, or most things like that are all seed oils because it's cheap, right?
Yes.
So it's really hard to find like a quality salad dressing that's got olive oil, because it's a mass production thing, right? So we typically make our own out of olive oil and some other things, because there's nothing you can buy really doesn't have a seed oil in it.
Thank you for that, Tom. And every time I go to the grocery store or a new grocery store, I always scour the salad dressings too, because I'm always looking for one that's made with like olive oil. And I'm like, why can't I just? And yeah, I'm like you. If I want to eat a healthy like salad dressing, then I get to make it myself. And I mean, those are delicious too, but it gets to be part of my routine. So thank you for sharing that. And that will go with like a lot of food items that we might like depend on. Like when we've already heard, maybe a lot of us like yogurt has a lot of sugar in it. So I'm hard pressed to find a yogurt unless it's plain. And then I get to add my own thing to it, right? I could add a little bit of honey, and then I know it's like honey from my local area that might actually help with my immune system versus the fructose or whatever else they put in the yogurt. So great. What else?
I had a question on the pH. So what about blood pH? You talked about urine and saliva, but blood could be different. Like some things will affect your urine, but not necessarily your blood pH, right?
Yes. So blood pH and actually stomach pH is another area where it's going to be drastically different. Stomach pH will be very low, obviously, because of your stomach acid. And we have buffers when the food comes out of the stomach into the small intestines. And when I have a leaky gut, that can leak into my blood too and make my blood more acidic, which is problematic as well. But blood pH, there are meters that will test your blood, and you could poke yourself like diabetics do to test their insulin. And some people are like totally down for that. I think my little brother did that. Actually, he did ketogenic diet for like 9 months and lost, maybe he did it for a whole year and lost 90 pounds. He's since gained some back because of his lifestyle, but like not 90 pounds. But he was really systematic about it, and he got all of his blood levels tested too to make sure he was safe. He was looking at his lipo profile and other parameters that he was looking at. So there are meters that can test your blood as well. And an indication, like relying more on my body. Like, I know I'm acidic when I'm eating, when I've had a stint of eating not very clean and I've had a stressful time. I know that my body will be a little bit more acidic. So I'm not one to test myself, even though I like science. But if that's something that will motivate you to like eat clean because you want to watch how your pH changes when you diet change, then do it. The more evidence that you can collect for yourself, the easier it is to get all the parts of your brain going forward, because there is a part of your brain that doesn't want to change, even if it's logical. So when you show that part of your brain, hey, we're improving, this is good for us, that's valuable. But for me, it's like, I can just tell my energy is low. I don't feel, my mood is dampened. And, it's just lethargy. I can just tell like, oh, I know I've been eating like I can't have 2 cookies every day. Like, it's going to affect my energy. So thank you for asking about that, Doug. And doing experiments with yourself is very valuable. Anybody else? Julie, I'd love to hear if you have your favorite thing. No pressure.
My favorite thing is that, well, just my takeaway is I have to take more time to plan before I go to the grocery store.
Beautiful.
It's a lot more complicated.
Thank you for
I
sharing.
mean, I think you get like your favorites after a while, but
Mhm.
there's a lot to think about.
Absolutely. And that's where we getting to do it together. Like in the past, I've had groups where we do like the cleanse, we do the reset cleanse, and we get together and before COVID, we would meet and each make a big meal and then share like to-go boxes with each other. And then we had like a week's worth of food that was unique. And that's an example of how community change is very helpful. So maybe we can get a group together and do something, or you can get a group together and do something like that, just to give us enough momentum to get going so that I've had a week of food and I can notice the difference, because there's always a lot of evidence after a week of eating clean for people. And then they can be like, okay, now I'm like set up to start new habits. And that's where coaching comes in too. If you're like, I know I need to eat better, but I don't know where to start. And I get to help people find the baby steps that work for them and move in the direction so that their brain doesn't give up, because that's natural. Like I can muscle through and like do it all on my own for a couple weeks, and then one bad situation or I get stressed out and now it all falls apart, versus having somebody that I'm accountable to, or even just doing it with my partner and they're on the same page. They can help us through. So that's why communities and having support and accountability is so valuable. So thank you for pointing that out, because this is effortful. It's a different lifestyle. And some of us might already be doing all that to some degree, and you're just going to tweak some things. But for like, there were parts in my life where I really had to like say no to a lot of things in my life for a long period of time before I started to feel right again. But it's all worth it. All right, go blue. Yes, John. I am here for any other questions. You can always reach out to me. I love to do the discovery sessions. We could come up with just a simple plan for you to start. You don't have to do coaching right away or ever. I like talking about it. So thank you for coming, and thank you for bringing your input and your perspective. And we're going to have a great day. I'm going to stop recording this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.